Hello. Today I would like to talk about the major painters in the 20th century. And if you ask anybody to mention just the name of a painter, they probably say Picasso, because most people either heard of Picasso or they seen their paintings. I mean, his paintings. So anyway, Picasso is world famous, and there are many reasons why he was famous. I'm not going to get into that right now, but just want to mention a few names, and maybe not in that order, but then later I can modify the order and I can basically argue uh, why that order may not be accurate. The number one would be obviously Picasso, and then right after him would be Matisse, and the third person should be Chagall, and then fourth person after let's see, Picasso, Matisse, and Chagall would be I would say Kandinsky, and then after Kandinsky, let's see, famous and very important would be Salvador Dali, the Spanish painter. Okay, these are five painters, and these are basically international painters, because if I talk about the painters, the major painters in the 20th century, each country has its own. Like the US has at least maybe I don't know, a few, the first top five, and I can talk about the first two, or at least the ones that I think they were revolutionary figures. But this list I'm giving or I'm talking about is the international. It's like, obviously Picasso was Spanish, and then Matisse was French, and then right after him Chagall. Chagall was from the old Russia or the old Soviet Union, and probably before there was a Soviet Union. Yeah, he was born in Belarus or Belarusia. He was, I think, Belarus or Belarusia, and probably the city of Minsk. I'm not quite sure on that, but anyway, then after that, that's Kandinsky. Kandinsky was Russian, and then right after that, Salvador Dali, also Spanish, another Spanish painter. There are many more that could be added to this list, and anyone could argue in the favor of who should be number one, who should be number two, number three. I think the classification based on ranks is really nonsense, because every painter has some strengths and some weaknesses that to us is weakness, because really to our taste, and everybody has a different taste, so there's always an audience for every painter. But these five painters, they were world famous. Like if you ask anybody, do you know about physics? Do you know about physicists? And if they say yes, they say, and you ask them, who's the most famous, or what name, give me one name of a physicist or a scientist in the 20th century, probably without a doubt, they mention Einstein. Einstein would be the one to mention. Though there were many, many more that they were geniuses, and Bohr, there was Fermi, and many, many more to mention. In any case, let's talk about Picasso first, and then we'll get into the rest of them in a few minutes. Picasso was born in Spain, I think in Malaga. I think that was his hometown. And his father was a painter, so by the time he was a teenager, he knew how to paint in a traditional way, and he was a very competent painter in that sense. So if you saw a painting that he did maybe when he was 16, you thought a mature painter painted it. But the problem was the timing. The problem was the timing, because when he went to France, he saw that the style that he was the best at is basically dead. And there are a lot of reasons why he became famous. Part of it was because he was sort of like a self-promoting himself all the time. and didn't have any shame about it. You know, he thought he was the best, and then he tried to prove that he was the best, and definitely became the most famous painter in the 20th century. But let's not forget that Gertrude Stein, who was a millionaire, a lady that was residing in France at the time and was close to the painters and the circle of, or the circles of the artists and then avant-garde and so on. I mean, she definitely helped him. She helped other painters as well. But with Picasso, she had a lot to do with his fame, and because he purchased, she purchased his paintings, and that helped him a lot. So anyway, here comes a young man from Spain. He goes to France. He's unknown in France. He mingles with the painters, with the other artists. Probably Modigliani is another one, the Italian painter, and he meets all kinds of people there. But his style is out of date. And the other thing that probably irked him, it really bothered him, was that the most famous painter at the time in 1900s, early 19, before 1910, 1908, was Matisse. And one of the reasons was that Matisse was an older painter anyway. And he was the leader of Fauvist. I mean, they call it, I think, Fauvism, or Fauvist means the wild animals in French, I think. And he was the leader of those guys. And that's really an important movement, because at least in a sense it did contribute to German expressionist, perhaps maybe in a way of brush stroke, you know, and not realistic colors. Anyway, so he goes there and he mingles with all other artists, and then eventually when he starts, he looks around and he sees that his style is out of fashion, old. So he comes up with, he really on purpose, he looks for a style to make himself different from other people. Now, why I say on purpose? Because when a new style comes to be, there could be two reasons. One is that you basically subconsciously, you're not conscious of creating a new style, but other people call it a new style, and then therefore you think, okay, I painted this way, but the other people recognize that this is a new style. Then on the other hand, there are people that on purpose, they try to create a new style, and they do anything, they keep searching, and Picasso was one of them. Anyway, with the help of the George Braque, he basically he tried to come up with a new style, and these two, with the help of George Braque, these two artists got together and started this Cubism. Basically, Cubism, and then I think has pros and cons, but really Cubism as this style is really nonsense, because it doesn't have any colors, doesn't have any particular shape. It has really sharp angles, and Picasso's fame really rests on Cézanne's cubes. Because if you look at the Cézanne's paintings towards the end of, especially towards the end of his life, Cézanne was looking for a way to paint landscape using sort of like a block or blocks. So if you put these blocks next to each other, you have a landscape. He was searching for a way to paint easily, I think. And so if you look at his landscape, you see some shapes. They're not really square, but or rectangle, but you could think of it as a sort of like a building block to a landscape approach. And because Picasso said Cézanne was father of us all, and the art historians, they say that he was inspired by those kind of block shapes or square shapes you see in Cézanne's work, so that also attributed to spreading his fame. But other than that, Cubism, which has three different categories, analytical Cubism and so on, doesn't have really much significance as a style is by itself. Now, yes, was very famous movement, but we are talking about significance. Since I'm an artist myself, I can look at his art and I can say, well, really doesn't have much significance, artistic significance, because of this and that, and I can argue that. But anyway, even Picasso realized that, and after he happened to see Matisse and Fauves and their explosion of colors, he basically moved on to this and explored this new style of his with George Braque, the so-called Cubism. But prior to that, I think what is essentially very important work of Picasso that is full of feelings is his blue and rose period. Now, the art historians say blue indicating the sad period of his life, and also pink, the rosy period of his life. That means maybe he was feeling better, his financial situation started changing towards better, and so on. But if you look at his paintings, his biggest strength is in those two, I guess I could say two different styles, two different colors, blue period and rose period, which is pinkish, reddish, kind of. At any case, and then after that you got Cubism. That Cubism has three, phases to it. But Picasso realized, and probably along with George Braque, maybe George Braque kept on painting Cubism. That's why we never hear much about him. We mostly hear about Picasso. But Picasso, after a few years, he realized that there's only so much you could do with this. And then he moved on to doing whatever he wanted to do. And that's the genius of Picasso, because the genius of Picasso is not Cubism. Again, I repeat, is not Cubism. Cubism as a style by itself is not very significant. The genius of Picasso was that he would move on, he did move on to different ways of painting. And the other thing that makes him really a great painter or a genius is that he painted almost till the day, I think, till the day he died. I have to research that, but I think he painted till the old age, till his old age, and either he 92, 93, I think he died in 1973, I believe. So he lived a long life. Matisse also lived a long life, but he died in his, I think, in his late 80s. Now, mind you, everything I record here is, I have no notes here, I have no preparation. This is all from years and years of studying art and art history, and as a painter myself, this is not, I don't have anything, I don't have any professional equipment. This is what I call a cheap art series, homemade, and I hope it's of some use to some of you guys out there. What else I can tell about Picasso is that, anyway, after he became famous, he started selling. Gertrude Stein was his main patron, and then other people, basically Russian collectors discovered him and bought his paintings. After, when he became financially secure, he did whatever he wanted to do. And he's also almost just as much famous about his love affairs, which we will not get into that here because that's out of the subject of art or subject of painting. Anyhow, he in 1950s, 1960s, he was probably the most famous painter in the world, especially after Matisse died. And I think Matisse died in 1950s. So then you got 1950s, end of the decade of 1950s, the whole decade of 1960s, and the beginning of 1970s. And the only major, well, I guess there was Chagall too, but basically Picasso was number one as far as fame. After he died, I think probably, let's see who was left. Chagall was left. Dali was also alive. and then I think Kandinsky died long before those guys. Anyway, that's basically some about some stuff, tidbits about Picasso, and I could talk about his life a little bit more, but I think I stop at this, and we'll go on to talk about Matisse. So this is basically the first part of the 5 parts of the art series, art history series, and it's sort of like a casual way of looking at these painters. I hope you find it useful, and then if you have any comment, you can write down your comment, and I'll be happy to look at them. All right, thank you very much.